"Stop," a quiet voice commanded from the doorway. "If you give him that, he will die." Amira Solis, a janitor in her late 30s, let her cleaning gloves fall to the polished floor. Her gaze was fixed, not with panic, but with a terrifying certainty. "This isn't a cardiac event," she continued, her voice cutting through the alarms. "It's chemical exposure. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, back to our story. The lead specialist, Dr. Cale Moritz, spun around, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Excuse me, who in God's name are you?" Security personnel immediately started toward her. Amira didn't flinch. "I've seen this reaction before. Your billionaire has been poisoned, not by an enemy, but by himself." But 12 hours before this janitor shattered the sterile silence of the ICU, the chaos had a different rhythm. It was the rhythm of arrogant confidence. When Dorian Vale's private helicopter descended onto the hospital's roof, it was less a medical emergency and more a royal procession. The hospital, a recipient of his generous funding, transformed into a fortress. An entire wing was cleared. Staff with insufficient clearance were sent home. The air crackled with the energy of money and power asserting its dominance over mortality. Dorian, still semi-conscious, had been wheeled in on a state-of-the-art gurney, his face pale, but his expression still locked in a scowl of indignation, as if the universe had made a grave clerical error. His chief assistant, a severe woman named Evelyn, barked orders into a phone. "Secure the floor, no press, and get me the best. Not the best in this city, the best on the planet. I don't care what it costs." And so they came. Like pilgrims to a shrine, the gods of medicine arrived. Dr. Cale Moritz, whose name was whispered in the halls of Johns Hopkins, with a reverence usually reserved for saints. Dr. Aris Thorne from Boston, a neurotoxicologist who had literally written the book on exotic poisons. Dr. Lena Petrova from Zurich, a geneticist whose work had redefined cellular aging. One by one, they filed into the private suite, a dream team of 20 brilliant minds, their collective presence a bulwark against the indignity of death. There was a palpable sense of excitement among them, the thrill of tackling the ultimate challenge. Saving Dorian Vale would be more than a medical victory. It would be a legacy. At the edge of this whirlwind, Amira Solis began her shift. She punched her time card, donned her navy blue scrubs, and gathered her supplies. Her work was a map of quiet routines: disinfect the rails, empty the biohazard bins, mop the floors until they reflected the harsh fluorescent lights without flaw. She was trained to be invisible, to move through the background of life and death dramas without leaving a trace. And for years she had perfected this art. Anonymity was her shield. For the first few hours, the atmosphere inside Dorian's suite was one of controlled, academic intensity. The doctors circled his bed, their voices a low murmur of complex medical jargon. They ran tests with equipment that looked like it belonged on a starship. They analyzed holographic data projections, debating mitochondrial decay and synaptic misfires. They were confident, almost casual. This was a puzzle, and they were the masters of puzzles. Amira, cleaning the corridor outside, could feel their certainty through the glass. It was a feeling she remembered with a bitter pang, the clean, sharp confidence of science, the belief that every mystery had an answer waiting in a data set, a belief that had been ripped from her, leaving a scar she touched every time she saw the ValeCorp logo. But as the hours bled into one another, the confidence began to curdle. The puzzle refused to yield. Dorian's vitals would stabilize, then crash without warning. Violent, full-body convulsions would seize him, his back arching off the bed, followed by periods of terrifying stillness. Every treatment they administered either had no effect or, perplexingly, seemed to make things worse. The academic debate escalated into sharp, ego-driven arguments. "It's a prion disease, I'm telling you," Thorne insisted, jabbing a finger at a brain scan. "The protein folding is all wrong." "Nonsense, the onset is too rapid," Petrova countered, her voice tight with frustration. "This is a cascading metabolic failure. We need to bypass his liver function entirely." Dr. Moritz, the designated leader, struggled to maintain control. The pressure was immense. Outside the glass, Evelyn's severe face was a constant, silent accusation. Every beep of a failing monitor was a hammer blow against his perfect record. He started to sweat, his movements becoming jerky and uncertain. He was the world's best, standing at the bedside of the world's richest, and he was failing. It was during her fourth pass of the corridor that Amira began to notice the anomalies the doctors were too blind to see. A faint, sharp smell that clung to the air, like ozone mixed with a cloying, sweet chemical. It was a scent from her nightmares, the ghost of her former life in a ValeCorp laboratory. She paused her mopping, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It can't be," she told herself. "They discontinued that formula years ago." Then, through the glass, she saw it. As a nurse changed an IV bag, she wiped Dorian's arm with a sanitizing cloth. For a fleeting second, under the focused beam of the surgical light, Amira saw a fine, silvery residue on his skin, a delicate shimmer that wasn't sweat or medication. It was the signature trace of Compound 47, the very nanoparticle she had warned them about, the one they had ruined her life to silence. A cold wave of dread and vindication washed over her. "He's not dying from a disease," she realized with chilling certainty. "He's dying from his own creation." She felt a dizzying urge to scream, to bang on the glass and tell them they were looking in the wrong place. But the memory of a courtroom, of smirking lawyers and a judge who looked at her as if she were dirt, paralyzed her. "No one listens to janitors," the voice in her head whispered. "They will destroy you all over again." Inside the room, the situation reached a breaking point. Dorian's body went into a prolonged, violent seizure. Alarms shrieked, a piercing, unified scream of failure. "His oxygen saturation is plummeting again, down to 70%, a nurse shouted, her voice trembling. "Damn it!" Moritz slammed his fist on a steel cart, his composure finally shattering. He was a man drowning, grasping at any piece of debris. He saw one last, desperate option on the monitor, a powerful, broad-spectrum chelation agent designed to bind with heavy metal toxins. It was a wild gamble, a shot in the dark, but doing nothing was no longer an option. "Give him the advanced chelation agent," he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. 50 milligrams. Push it now." That was it. That was the death sentence. Amira knew the agent would react explosively with the nanoparticles, causing irreversible cellular collapse. It wouldn't save him, it would execute him. The courtroom, the whispers, the years of shame. It all vanished, burned away by the fierce, undeniable need to prevent a death. She couldn't save her father, but she could save this man, even if he was the architect of her pain. Her choice was no choice at all. That's when she dropped her gloves. That's when she stepped through the door. And that's when the door to the suite slid open. A janitor, a woman no one had noticed in the past 12 hours of chaos, stepped forward. Her movements were calm, deliberate, a stark contrast to the frantic energy in the room. "Stop," she said, her voice quiet but piercing the noise. If you give him that, he will die. Just as security reached to grab her arm, every monitor connected to Dorian Vale screamed a single, continuous tone. His heart had stopped. To understand how a woman who mopped floors for a living became the only hope for a man who owned the world, we need to go back 3 months, to the day his empire began poisoning him from the inside out. 3 months earlier, Dorian Vale did not know the name Amira Solace. He wouldn't have known it if it were engraved on a plaque screwed to his desk. The world, to Dorian, was divided into 2 simple categories: assets and obstacles. People were merely a subfolder in either category, their value measured in utility, their humanity a rounding error. His own humanity was a carefully curated performance. He existed not in a home, but in a monument to his own success, a penthouse that scraped the clouds, with glass walls that dissolved the boundary between him and the city he owned. The air inside was purified to a hospital-grade standard, the temperature maintained to a fraction of a degree, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper-quiet movements of his robotic staff. His life was a sterile, hermetically sealed ecosystem of control. ValeCorp Industries was the engine of this ecosystem. Its public mission was a masterpiece of corporate poetry, engineering a cleaner, safer tomorrow. They developed revolutionary eco-friendly cleaning solutions and smart technologies that promised to eliminate human error and inefficiency. The ValeCorp logo, a stylized green leaf cradled in the sharp lines of a microchip, was everywhere, a symbol of benevolent, profitable progress. Dorian's moral flaw was not a secret. It was the core of his brand. He saw empathy as a design flaw in the human machine, a sentimental bug that hindered progress. He'd famously said in a televised interview, "Compassion is a currency for the poor. The rich trade in results." His team of yes-men, a collection of ambitious executives with sharp suits and hollowed-out souls, echoed this sentiment in every board meeting. The early trials for the Smart Clean line show a minor anomaly in cellular adhesion with certain organic compounds. A young, nervous scientist named Ben Carter reported one Tuesday morning, his pointer shaking as he indicated a complex chart on the holographic display. The boardroom was cold, the long marble table reflecting the impassive faces of Dorian and his lieutenants. Dorian didn't even look at the chart. He stared at the young man, his eyes cold and dissecting. "Define minor anomaly, Ben." "Well, sir, under prolonged exposure, we're talking months, it could potentially lead to respiratory inflammation in a small percentage of users. It's a 1 in a million edge case, but the ethics committee suggested further." "Did the sensors read 0 toxicity?" Dorian cut him off, his voice dangerously soft. "Yes, sir. The airborne sensors are all clear. But this is a surface contact issue, a bioaccumulation over time that—" "The sensors read 0, Dorian repeated, this time with the finality of a judge's gavel. "That is our reality. That is our truth. We sell what the sensors see. We are not in the business of coddling 1 in a million chances. We are in the business of perfection. Thank you for your time, Ben. Your position in R&D is no longer required." The young man's face went white. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Security guards, silent and ever-present, materialized and escorted him from the room. Dorian turned back to the board. "Any more questions about the Q4 rollout?" The silence was absolute. The message was clear. Reality was whatever Dorian Vale decided it was. Across town, in a small third-floor apartment that smelled of soil and old books, Amira Solace's world was governed by a different set of principles. Her life was not sterile. It was alive. Sunlight streamed through the windows, nourishing a dense jungle of potted plants she tended with a botanist's gentle precision. While Dorian's robots polished a world of glass and steel, Amira wiped dust from the leaves of a thriving fiddle-leaf fig. She was a creature of meticulous habit and quiet compassion. Once, that meticulousness had been celebrated in the gleaming laboratories of a ViralCorp subsidiary. She had been Dr. Soulis, a rising star in environmental science, a scientist with a fierce, unwavering conscience. Now, she was just Amira, the janitor at the Vale-funded hospital, a ghost who cleaned up after the messes of the world. The fall had been swift and brutal. She had been the lead chemist on the project that birthed Compound 47, the nanoparticle core of the new Smart Clean line. Her data, the same data Ben Carter had likely rediscovered, showed the long-term risk, the slow, creeping danger of bioaccumulation. She had followed protocol, flagging the issue for her superiors. They had buried her report. She had pushed again, appealing to their sense of duty. They had threatened her. Finally, she had blown the whistle, leaking her findings to a single journalist. ViralCorp's legal machine had descended upon her not to refute her science, but to annihilate her character. They painted her as a disgruntled, unstable employee, a failed scientist looking for a payday. They dredged up her student loans, her father's medical debts, anything to craft a narrative of desperation. In a matter of months, she was discredited, her license revoked, and she was blacklisted from every reputable research institution in the country. They didn't just fire her, they erased her. The deepest wound, however, was her father. A retired factory worker, he had been part of an early community trial for a ViralCorp industrial cleaning agent, a precursor to Smart Clean. He developed a persistent, rasping cough, a slow, dawning pneumonia that doctors couldn't explain. He wasted away, his lungs turning to scar tissue. He died 6 months before Amira's lawsuit was dismissed. There was no proof, the lawyers had said, just a tragic coincidence. But Amira knew. She had seen the same cellular decay in her lab cultures. She lived with the quiet, gnawing certainty that the company she worked for had killed her father, and the science she loved had been powerless to stop it. One afternoon, during her break at the hospital, Amira sat in the quiet of the supply depot. A new shipment had arrived. A janitorial assistant was excitedly unboxing the latest products from ViralCorp, the Smart Clean line, now approved for hospital use. He held up a sleek, metallic canister with the familiar green leaf logo. They say this stuff atomizes dirt on contact. 100% eco-friendly, zero toxins, he said, beaming. It's the future. Amira saw the canister and flinched as if struck. The logo, the promise, the lie, it was all there. A wave of nausea rolled through her. She looked at the canister, then at the sprawling hospital wing that bore Dorian Vale's name on a gleaming brass plaque. Still poisoning the world in the name of innovation, she murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. Meanwhile, in his skybound penthouse, Dorian Vale was having a nosebleed. It came on suddenly, a bright crimson bloom against the stark white of his Egyptian cotton handkerchief during a video call with his Tokyo office. He pressed the handkerchief to his face, annoyed. He blamed the recycled air on his jet, the stress of a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. A week later, a crushing migraine descended during a charity gala. He retreated to a quiet lounge, his vision swimming, the polite chatter of the city's elite a hammer against his skull. He popped a handful of imported painkillers and returned to the party, smiling for the cameras, his charisma a flawless mask over the cracks that were beginning to form. He dismissed the symptoms as he dismissed all weakness, as irrelevant data. The fatigue was the price of ambition. The headaches were the strain of genius. His body was simply struggling to keep pace with his will. He didn't see them as warnings. He saw them as signs of greatness, the honorable wounds of a king pushing his empire and himself to the very edge. The stage was set. The scientist and the mogul, the victim and the perpetrator, their worlds orbiting each other in blissful ignorance. One was slowly dying from a poison he sold as a cure, and the other was the only person on Earth who knew how to stop it. The collision was not a matter of if, but when. The collision happened on a stage, under the brilliant, unforgiving glare of 1,000 spotlights. The event was the global launch gala for ValeCorp's Smart Clean line, a masterfully orchestrated spectacle of corporate power. An orchestra played, champagne flowed like water, and the air hummed with the self-congratulatory buzz of the world's financial elite. At the center of it all stood Dorian Vale, a black tuxedoed king surveying his kingdom. He was at the apex of his power, delivering a speech about the dawn of a new, sterile, and perfectly efficient era. "We are not just selling a product," he declared, his voice booming through the grand ballroom, amplified and confident. "We are selling the future, a future free from unseen threats, a future where purity is not a hope, but a guarantee." As he spoke, a wave of dizziness washed over him, the edges of his vision blurring into a soft, indistinct haze. The teleprompter's words swam. He gripped the lectern, his knuckles turning white, attributing the weakness to a lack of sleep. It was a momentary glitch in the system, but then a sharp, searing pain shot through his chest, as if a shard of ice were being driven into his heart. His breath hitched. The flawless mask of charisma cracked. He faltered, clutching his chest. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The cameras, broadcasting live to millions, zoomed in, capturing the raw, animal panic that flickered in his eyes. He tried to speak, but only a choked gasp escaped. Then, with the whole world watching, Dorian Vale, the man who had built an empire on the promise of control, collapsed. The aftermath was a hurricane of controlled chaos. Before his body even hit the floor, his security team had formed a human wall, shielding him from the prying eyes of the media. Within minutes, he was in a private ambulance, sirens screaming, cutting a path through the city. At the Vale-funded hospital, his team enacted a brutal lockdown. Secrecy was paramount. The official story was exhaustion, a noble ailment for a titan of industry. The reality was a terrifying mystery. Money became the only language spoken. When the first team of 10 local specialists failed to even produce a diagnosis after 12 hours, Evelyn, his assistant, made a series of ruthless calls. A river of gold began to flow across the globe, summoning the greatest medical minds to his bedside. The media frenzy was insatiable. He became the richest patient on Earth, a headline that fueled a morbid global obsession. Pundits debated his condition, stocks fluctuated with every rumored vital sign, and his face was plastered on every screen, a pale, unconscious symbol of the fact that some things could not be bought. Inside the ICU, the second wave of 10 doctors, the international dream team led by Dr. K.L. Moritz, was discovering this truth firsthand. They watched in disbelief as Dorian's body defied a millennium of medical knowledge. His vitals spiked and plummeted with no discernible pattern. One moment, his heart rate would soar to a terrifying 220 beats per minute. The next, it would drop so low he was technically flatlining. His blood panels were a baffling contradiction. They showed no signs of infection, no virus, no known poisons, no cardiac failure. Yet he was dying. Every intervention they attempted seemed to worsen his condition, as if they were pouring gasoline on an invisible fire. Their collective brilliance was not just failing, it was being mocked. This frantic, high-tech ballet of failure was the backdrop to Amira Solis's quiet, nightly routine. While doctors shouted complex chemical formulas and nurses sprinted with crash carts, Amira moved through the adjacent corridors with her mop and bucket. Her world was one of straight, clean lines on a polished floor, the steady rhythm of a task done well. The contrast was stark. A visual representation of the chaos of theory versus the calm of simple, tangible work. She became an accidental witness to their desperation. As she cleaned near the nurses' station, she overheard fragments of their hushed, frantic conversations. Toxin levels are off the charts, but they don't match any known compounds. It's like his body is inventing a poison. Did you see the latest scan? It's showing signs of widespread respiratory collapse, but there's no physical obstruction. His lungs are clear. It makes no sense. Moritz is losing it. He just ordered another round of antivirals, but we all know this isn't a virus. Each overheard phrase was a key turning in a lock she had tried to seal shut. Respiratory collapse without obstruction. The words echoed in her memory, pulling her back to her father's final, wheezing days, to the data on her buried report. Her intuition, the trained instinct of a scientist, began to stir, a painful pulse beneath the surface of her quiet life. But with it came the flashbacks. The sneer of ValeCorp's lead attorney, the sight of her name dragged through the mud on news reports, the cold, dismissive look in the judge's eyes. No one listens to janitors, she reminded herself, the thought a bitter mantra. She would grip her mop handle tighter, focusing on the scent of bleach, on the satisfying glide of the mop head, on anything that would drown out the rising scream of her own conscience. To speak up was to invite that old pain back, to risk the fragile peace she had built in the shadows. It was a young doctor who first breached her wall of invisibility. Dr. Alara Quinn was the newest addition to Dr. Moritz's team, a brilliant but unassuming resident who watched more than she spoke. While the senior doctors postured and argued, Alara observed. She noticed the janitor who always seemed to pause when the alarms went off, whose gaze lingered on the monitors longer than it should. One evening, as Amira was changing the liner in a biohazard bin, Alara approached her. "You've been on this shift every night since he was admitted, haven't you?" Alara asked, her voice soft. Amira froze, startled. She nodded, keeping her eyes down. "Yes, ma'am." "I've seen you watch the monitors," Alara pressed gently. "You're not just cleaning, you're listening." Amira's head snapped up, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I'm just doing my job." The words were clipped, a warning. Alara didn't back down. A deep sadness had taken root in her. Science, her god, was failing. Every textbook, every lecture, every protocol was proving useless, and the sheer arrogance of her superiors was becoming suffocating. She saw a flicker of something in this janitor's eyes, not just defiance, but knowledge. "This man, we're losing him," Alara said, more to herself than to Amira. "Everything we do, it's like we're fighting a ghost." Amira simply looked at her, her expression unreadable, before turning and walking away, leaving Alara standing alone with her doubt. The seed of an unlikely alliance had been planted. The moment of truth came late on the third night. During a chaotic shift change, with alarms blaring and staff rushing to handle another sudden crash, a tablet cart was left unattended in the hallway. On its screen was Dorian Vale's open medical file. Amira saw it as she passed. Her heart began to pound. It was a flagrant breach of protocol, of ethics, of the quiet vow she had made to herself. But she couldn't stop. With trembling hands, she picked up the tablet. She scrolled past the doctor's notes, the contradictory theories, the litany of failed treatments. She went straight to the raw data, the results from the mass spectrometer, the detailed breakdown of his blood chemistry. She found the section labeled Unidentified Particulates. And there it was, a single molecular signature glowing faintly on the screen, highlighted by the lab's UV analysis software. A compound the hospital's library couldn't identify, but one she knew as well as her own reflection. ValeCorp Smart Clean Compound 47. The tablet almost slipped from her grasp. All the years of doubt, of wondering if she had been wrong, of carrying the weight of her father's death, evaporated in a single, searing moment of confirmation. The proof was right here. He had done this. Not just to her father, not just to the countless unknown victims, but to himself. She placed the tablet back on the cart, her movements slow and deliberate. She leaned against the cool wall, the smell of antiseptic filling her lungs, and exhaled a single, shaky breath. "You really did this to yourself," she whispered into the empty corridor. The knowledge burned in Amira's mind, a cold, hard certainty in a world of desperate guesses. For an entire day she carried the secret, her movements automated, her mind racing. She watched the organized chaos of the ICU, no longer with a detached sense of pity, but with the sharp, analytical gaze of a scientist observing a fatal error in an experiment. She saw everything, the doctors cycling through the same failed treatments, the growing despair in Dr. Maritz's eyes, the way Alara Quinn's gaze kept finding her in the crowded corridor, full of unspoken questions. The time for silent observation was over. The time for proof had come. Her opportunity arrived just after 3 a.m., cloaked in an instant of technological failure. The lights in the hospital flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the entire wing into a disorienting, absolute darkness. A collective gasp was followed by the frantic beeping of battery backups. Seconds later, the emergency system kicked in, bathing the corridor in the eerie, blood-red glow of the backup lights. It was a momentary power fluctuation, a non-event for the hospital's robust systems, but it was the window Amira needed. In the brief confusion, as nurses checked on ventilators and security did a preliminary sweep, she slipped through the open door of the ICU, a ghost in the crimson twilight. The room was quieter now, the energy more of exhaustion than panic. A lone resident monitored the machines while the senior doctors were on a forced break. Dorian Vale lay perfectly still, a figure in a technological tomb. Amira moved with a janitor's practiced invisibility, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the linoleum. She approached the bed, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She ignored the maze of monitors and focused on the IV line in his arm. There, just as she'd seen through the glass, was the faint, silvery shimmer on his skin, almost imperceptible in the dim light. Her hands, covered in fresh nitrile gloves from her cart, were trembling. She pulled a sterile tissue from her pocket, and with a touch as light as a whisper she wiped a sample from his arm. In the red glow, the residue was just a smudge. But she knew. She turned to leave, the evidence clutched in her hand. "What are you doing?" The voice, sharp and terrified, cut through the darkness. Amira froze, her back to the door. Dr. Alara Quinn stood there, her silhouette framed by the red light of the hallway, her face a mask of shock and accusation. She had seen everything. For a moment, neither of them moved. The beeping of the machines was the only sound, counting down the seconds of a man's life. Amira's past and future hung in this single, terrifying moment. "You need to leave, now," Alara whispered, her voice shaking. "If security finds you in here, if Dr. Moritz—" "They are killing him, Doctor," Amira said, her voice low and steady, imbued with a conviction that stopped Alara cold. She turned, her eyes meeting Alara's across the dimly lit room. "You see it, don't you? You know that none of this is working. You're a scientist. You know when an experiment has failed. We're trying everything, Alara countered weakly, the doubt she'd been suppressing evident in her tone. You're treating the symptoms, not the cause. Amira held up the tissue. The cause is right here, on his skin, in his blood. It's a poison, but it won't show up on your toxicology screens because your hospital, this entire city, is being cleaned with it every single day. Alara stared at her, bewildered. What are you talking about? Amira took a deep breath, the confession she had held for years finally breaking free. I'm talking about ViralCorp Smart Clean Compound 47, a nanoparticle designed to break down organic matter at a microbial level. Her voice dropped, laced with a decade of pain. I know because I helped create it. I built the formula that's killing him, and he destroyed my life for warning him that this would happen. The truth landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. Alara's eyes widened, the pieces clicking together with horrifying speed. The janitor's strange fixation, the unidentifiable toxin, the patient's inexplicable decline. This wasn't a crazy woman. This was a Cassandra, screaming a warning no one was willing to hear. Come with me, Alara said, her decision made in an instant. If you're right, God, if you're right, we need proof. Under the cover of the still chaotic shift, they made their way to a small secondary lab in the hospital's basement. It was a place for routine tests, quiet and empty at this hour. Alara reactivated a high-resolution mass spectrometer, her hands flying across the keyboard with practiced ease. Amira, her own scientific instincts roaring back to life, prepared a slide with the sample from the tissue, her movements precise and sure. For a few minutes, they weren't a doctor and a janitor. They were two scientists united by a singular desperate purpose. They inserted the sample. The machine whirred to life, its internal lasers analyzing the molecular structure of the silvery residue. They watched the screen, the silence stretching between them thick with anticipation. Then, the results began to populate. A complex chain of polymers and metallic isotopes appeared, forming a unique, elegant, and terrifying signature. Alara ran it against the hospital's official toxicology database. No match. Then she ran it against a broader commercial chemical index. A single result appeared on the screen, flagged with a dozen legal warnings and non-disclosure markers. ViralCorp Smart Clean Compound 47. Amira let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, a sound that was half sob, half vindication. Alara stared at the screen, her face pale with horror. The ghost she had been fighting had a name. Their attempt to confront Dr. Moritz was a catastrophic failure. They found him in his office, looking haggard and defeated, staring at Dorian's flatlining scans. Alara, holding a printout of the lab results, tried to explain their findings calmly and rationally. Moritz listened for less than a minute, his expression shifting from exhaustion to pure, undiluted rage. "Are you insane?" he finally exploded, snatching the paper from her hand and glancing at it with contempt. "You ran an unauthorized test based on a theory from a janitor?" He glared at Amira, who stood silently by the door, his eyes filled with a disgust that went beyond professional disagreement. It was classist primal fury. "You're a janitor, not a scientist," he snapped, his voice dripping with venom. "You clean floors. You do not get to interfere with my patients. Leave the medicine to professionals." "But doctor, the data is conclusive," Alara began. "The data is irrelevant," Moritz roared, crumpling the paper and throwing it on his desk. "Get out of my office, Dr. Quinn, before I have you stripped of your residency. And you," he said, pointing a trembling finger at Amira. "Get back to your mop before I have you thrown out of this hospital for good." They left without another word. The door had been slammed shut. Desperate and defeated, Amira walked back to the crumpled paper on his desk, smoothed it out, and left it sitting in the center of his blotter, a silent testament to the truth he refused to see. Hours later, the final breaking point arrived. A code blue echoed through the halls, a sound Amira had come to dread. Dorian's condition had plummeted. His oxygen saturation had dropped to a critical, unsurvivable level. The alarms in the ICU rang with a new, final urgency. From the corridor, Amira could see the frantic last-ditch efforts of the medical team. They were losing him. The doctors, their faces grim, began the protocols for pronouncing brain death. It was over. Ilara stood at the edge of the chaos, frozen. Her faith in her superiors, in the system, in the science she had dedicated her life to, was shattered. She looked at the dying man. Then her eyes flicked to the doorway, finding Amira standing there, mop in hand, her face a mask of trembling resolve. Their eyes met, a silent exchange of despair and desperate hope. The moment of decision was here. All the official channels had failed. All the brilliant minds had been proven wrong. Amira's voice was barely a whisper, a promise made to herself as much as to Ilara, a vow whispered against the screaming alarms of a dying man. "If no one else will do something," she said, "I will." The whisper hung in the air for only a second before Amira acted. The time for whispers, for warnings, for quiet observation was over. She dropped the mop. The plastic handle clattered against the linoleum, a sharp, profane sound that broke the spell of organized panic in the ICU. She didn't walk into the room. She stormed it, a tempest of quiet fury. Her eyes were locked on a sleek, humming white box in the corner of the room, a state-of-the-art air purifier bearing the ValeCorp logo. "Turn off that purifier," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned everyone into a moment of shocked silence. "It's not cleaning the air. It's poisoning it. It's leaking the same compound that's killing him." Before anyone could react, she lunged for her discarded cleaning cart, which she had purposefully left near the door. From a hidden compartment, she pulled a simple, unlabeled spray bottle. It wasn't a medical device. It was a desperate, improvised solution she had concocted in the quiet hours of her shift. Inside was a dark, murky liquid, a mixture of activated charcoal solution from the hospital's own emergency supply, saline, and a potent concentration of plant enzymes she had carefully extracted at home from plants known for their neutralizing properties. It was folk wisdom mixed with forgotten science, a prayer in a bottle. "What is the meaning of this?" Dr. Moritz bellowed, finding his voice. "Security! Get her out of here now!" Two burly guards, who had been standing by helplessly, surged forward, their hands reaching for Amira. But Ilara Quinn was faster. She threw herself between them and Amira, her arms spread wide. "No, wait!" Ilara shouted, her voice trembling but resolute. She turned to Moritz, her eyes pleading. "You have to listen to her. She knows what she's talking about. We have proof. The poison is from his own company." Moritz stared at her, his face a canvas of disbelief and fury. All his authority, all his expertise was being challenged by a junior resident and a janitor. His entire world was tilting on its axis. He hesitated, his mind a battlefield of pride, protocol, and a tiny, gnawing seed of doubt. The alarms were still screaming, a relentless chorus of his failure. In that second of indecision, the world fell silent. The frantic, irregular beeping of Dorian's heart monitor ceased, replaced by a single, unwavering, soul-shattering tone. the flat line. On the screen, the jagged mountains of a struggling life collapsed into a perfectly straight, perfectly final horizon. He was gone. The silence was broken by a collective gasp. A nurse moved to record the time of death. The room was thick with the bitter taste of defeat. In the face of absolute failure, there was nothing left to lose. Moritz's eyes, wide with horror, met Amira's. In her gaze, he saw no panic, only a fierce, unwavering resolve. The rules no longer mattered. His pride was ash. "Go!" he choked out, the single word a surrender and a command. "Do it!" The guards stepped back. Amira didn't waste a second. She moved with the fluid, economic grace of a surgeon. First, she ripped the purifier's plug from the wall, silencing its poisonous hum. "Open the vents. Get fresh air in here, now," she ordered, and a stunned nurse scrambled to obey. With the spray bottle, she didn't spray Dorian. She sprayed a clean cloth until it was saturated, the dark liquid soaking the sterile white fabric. She moved to the bedside and began wiping Dorian's skin, his face, his neck, his arms where the silvery residue was most concentrated. Her movements were gentle but firm, a cleansing ritual. She worked in silence, her focus absolute. While the greatest minds in medicine had assaulted his body with drugs and electricity, she was simply cleaning him. Next, she unhooked the automated ventilator. She grabbed a manual resuscitation bag, the simple, hand-pumped tool used in basic emergencies. She placed the mask over Dorian's face and began to squeeze, forcing pure, clean oxygen into his lungs with a steady, rhythmic pressure. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. It was the most basic of medical procedures, a human act of breathing for another. For 10 seconds there was nothing. The flatline tone droned on, a funeral dirge for the richest man on earth. The doctors watched, their faces etched with a profound, humbling helplessness. They had come here as gods, and they were being shown a miracle by a woman who cleaned their floors. Then, a flicker. A single, tentative beep from the heart monitor. It was small, weak, but it was there. Amira didn't pause, squeeze, release. Another beep, stronger this time. Then a third and a fourth, falling into a slow, fragile but steady rhythm. A collective disbelieving sigh of relief filled the room. Dorian Vale's chest rose on its own, a deep, shuddering gasp. His color, a deathly gray, began to recede, replaced by the faint flush of returning life. Silence descended. Amira stepped back, the empty spray bottle still clutched in her hand, her work done. The doctors, for the first time, took a step back with her, a silent, unconscious act of deference. Dorian's eyelids fluttered, then opened. His eyes, hazy and disoriented, scanned the blurry faces of the doctors surrounding him. He looked like a man pulled from a great depth. His gaze moved past the white coats, past the machines, and found Amira. It locked onto her, the one person in the room not dressed in the uniform of medical authority. His voice was a dry, rasping whisper, the first words spoken by a man reborn. Who are you?" Amira looked at the billionaire, the man whose company had taken everything from her, and her expression was not of triumph, but of a deep, weary sorrow. "Someone you tried to erase," she said. The name clicked into place in the fog of Dorian's memory. Solace. He remembered it not from a face, but from a lawsuit file. A nuisance whistleblower his lawyers had crushed years ago. The woman he had personally ordered them to make an example of. The guilt, immediate and overwhelming, flooded in. It was a poison far more potent than the one that had just been wiped from his skin. The story broke like a dam. It didn't leak, it exploded. The initial headline was a viral lightning strike. Janitor saves billionaire after 20 of world's best doctors fail. It was a modern-day fable, a perfect narrative of the humble hero and the humbled elite. The media frenzy was instantaneous and global. News vans camped outside the hospital. Talk shows debated the story, turning Amira Solis into an overnight folk hero and Dr. Moritz's dream team into a punchline. The moral debates raged. Was it a miracle, a failure of modern medicine, or a simple case of one person seeing a truth 20 experts had missed? The corporate fallout was just as swift. ViralCorp's PR machine went into overdrive, issuing statements about an isolated incident and internal reviews, but they were trying to patch a Grand Canyon with tape. The story was too compelling, the implications too horrifying. Within 48 hours, Ilara Quinn, shielded by the hospital's stunned administration, officially submitted her and Amira's lab report. Independent labs, spurred by journalistic and federal pressure, were dispatched to the hospital. Their findings were conclusive and damning. They confirmed Amira's discovery in every terrifying detail. ViralCorp's wonder product, the Smart Clean line, did emit carcinogenic mycotoxins. The nanoparticles, harmless to airborne sensors, bonded with skin oils and were absorbed over time, causing a slow, systemic breakdown of cellular function. The air purifiers, designed to capture organic matter, were inadvertently aerosolizing the compound, turning entire rooms into invisible gas chambers. It wasn't just Dorian. It was a global threat packaged in a sleek, eco-friendly canister. The lawsuits came next, an avalanche of them. Families whose loved ones had died of mysterious lingering illnesses. Factory workers with chronic respiratory conditions. Whistleblowers who had been silenced, like Ben Carter, emerged from the woodwork, armed with a newfound courage and a global audience. ViralCorp's stock didn't just fall, it evaporated. The empire of glass, built on a foundation of lies, shattered. Dorian recovered slowly, in a different, undisclosed facility. His physical healing was straightforward, but his psychological reckoning had just begun. He was haunted. In the quiet hours of the night, he didn't see spreadsheets or stock tickers. He saw faces, the face of the young scientist he had fired for telling the truth. The faces of the countless, anonymous people who had cleaned their homes with his poison. And most of all, the face of Amira Solis's father, a man whose name he found in a dusty, long-forgotten legal file about a dismissed factory worker lawsuit. For the first time in his life, the impenetrable armor of his ego was gone. He saw his legacy not as a monument of innovation, but as a mass grave. One morning, he looked at his reflection in the mirror and saw not a king, but a monster. That was the day he began to dismantle his own world. He fired his entire board of directors and his legal team. He liquidated ViralCorp, selling off every patent, every building, every asset. He poured his entire multi-billion-dollar fortune into a single, massive compensation fund for the victims and their families. With what little remained, he created a new foundation. Its mission was to fund ethical science, to support the whistleblowers and the Cassandras of the world, to ensure that conscience could never again be silenced by profit. He named it the Solis Initiative. Weeks later, he returned to the hospital. He found Amira on her regular shift, mopping the corridor of the now infamous ICU wing. She looked up as he approached, her expression calm, unreadable. "I came to offer you a job," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its old arrogance. "I want you to be the director of the foundation. Your name is on it. It's only right. You would have full control, unlimited resources. You can change the world." Amira finished a long, smooth stroke with her mop. She leaned against the handle and looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She saw not a billionaire, but just a man, scarred and searching. "No, thank you," she said simply. Dorian was taken aback. "But why? This is everything you fought for." "I didn't save you for power or for a position, Mr. Vale," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "I saved you because a life is a life, and it deserves a second chance, even when the person living it might not. You can rebuild what you broke. That's your work now. My work," she said, gesturing to the gleaming floor, "is to clean what remains." She offered him a small, sad smile, then turned back to her task. The final scene was set. Dorian accepted her decision without another word. He left the hospital, but his atonement became a quiet, daily ritual. Every morning, on his way to the foundation, he would walk through that same hospital corridor. He would see her, and she would see him. He would offer a simple, quiet greeting, and she would nod in return. He didn't see a janitor anymore. He saw the woman who had reminded him what it cost to be human. He built his fortune by making the world spotless. But it took a janitor to show him what true cleansing meant. The final shot lingers on a heart monitor by an empty hospital bed. The beep is not frantic, not fading, just steady, rhythmic, human.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.